In this video, we're going to be reassembling the blackout light assembly, and I've got a new old stock replacement lamp assembly here. It's marked April 13th, 1945, and it's also marked 105860. I'm going to have to remove the Cosmoline off the back before we can install it. There are a lot of different methods that I've heard about removing Cosmoline from anywhere from diesel fuel, gasoline, and paint thinner. This is in really good shape, so I think I can just remove this with a rag and maybe a spatula or piece of cardboard. First, I'm going to peel back this fabric here that covers the screw assembly. And again, as you look here, it's in really good shape and it's nice and soft and pliable, so I think I won't have to use any chemicals. I would prefer not to, so I didn't damage those stamps that are on the back side of the lamp assembly. I'm just taking a piece of cardboard and I'm going to scrape the Cosmoline off as best as I can, and then I can just discard that in the trash. And so according to what I've read, after I get the majority off with this cardboard, then I can take my rag and just simply rub the rest of it off. I don't know if you noticed when I took the fabric off there, this also marked 6 volt underneath where the fabric was, so that's kind of interesting too. And again, this is the reason I'm doing this. I'm just going to scrape this off. I don't want to use any chemicals because I really like those markings that are on the back of that lamp assembly. Nobody will probably ever see them until it's disassembled again someday, but I'm thinking that the next owner of this Jeep, when they take it apart, might like to see that. Now that I've got most of it off here, I'm just going to take my rag now and continue wiping the Cosmoline off. It is a little difficult to do, but as you see here, if you just rub on it in a certain one direction or the other and keep at it, it'll take a few minutes to get this off of here, but the rag seems to be working very well. After I get it all cleaned off here, you also want to make sure that you take your rag and you want to clean out the outside edge very well, and you also want to clean off that screw underneath the screw so you can back the screw out a little bit. Again, April 13th, 1945, 105860, 6 volt, and we're ready to install it. On the ring and spring assembly, I'll show you here, there's a little notch, and that notch goes on the back side of the lamp assembly, and that's where the lamp assembly and the bulb gets its ground from. I'll show you here the tab that's on the side here of the lamp assembly. If you go back to the previous video where I disassembled the blackout light, you can see how the condition of the parts where they were all rusty and they were full of a lot of paint. So I'm going to have to remove some of this paint that I put on this ring and spring assembly so I'll get a proper ground. So you'll want to remove it from the inside and then flip it over and also remove it from the outside. The paint that I used on this was to kind of match the original color that the ring and spring would have been. And I used a Rust-Oleum aluminum metallic paint, and it matches really, really well here. As you see, as I scrape this off, it goes right back down to the bare metal there, but it really matches the color well. So then I'll turn it over on the other side, and this is the tab where our grounding cable will go, grounding wire, and I'll clean the paint off on the inside of the threads there, and then I'll flip it over and I'll clean off the area on the face side really well so I can get a nice good ground when I install the wire. And I'll show you right here as I cleaned it all off. Again, look how well that paint matches the original color of the metal. It was rusty and pitted, and I think it came out really nice. These 2 points are ground areas again, and make sure you've got all the paint cleaned off there. Again, I'll show you how I got this cleaned off on the front side and the back side. Before I install it, I'm going to go ahead and install the ground wire. The ground wire has 2 different connections on either end. One is a fork, or looks like a U, and the other is a ring. It looks like round. We're going to be installing the fork end onto the outside here of our ring and spring assembly. I'm using the original screw. I just cleaned it up on a wire wheel, but I am going to be using a new star washer. We'll install the star washer onto the screw, and then we'll screw it slightly in to the outside here of the ring. Just a little bit of point of reference while I'm putting this screw on here. If you notice that the new old stock lamp assembly that I'm installing, I painted all of the housings and the door with Ron Fitzpatrick Jeep Parts number 33070 low luster olive drab. And here you see the fork end, and we're going to install that as shown here so it slips underneath the star washer. A little difficult to film this and do this at the same time, but I can show you again here. It slides underneath the star washer. Then we'll just take a flathead screwdriver and we'll tighten it down. When we get to the last part where it's really snug, we'll give that a nice one last tight turn to make sure that that star washer seats into that fork connector. It's amazing how many ground parts are just on this simple blackout light assembly, and they're very important in the function and operation of it, so make sure everything is clean, tight, and bright. We'll go ahead now and we'll take our lamp assembly, and I'll show you one more time here the tab that grounds that assembly so the bulb can work. And we'll go back to our notch that we've cleaned off earlier in the video with a razor blade, and then you install the ring on the back side of the lamp assembly just as such. It just presses on. I'll show you the top here of the ring, and you see this little notch. That should be lined up straight with the hood on your bulb assembly, and then that's going to go on the inside here where that little notch peg is on the back, and then the screw hole goes towards the bottom. So you slide in the ring inside and line it up with the notches, and then you can press it inside the door. Once I get the ring all pressed inside here, it should seat very nicely, and you can see that that top piece there, it will move if you don't put it in that notch, so make sure you've got it on the notch on the inside of the door. And you can see here it's lined up with the rivet that holds the little clip on the inside of the door as well. Now and reset the springs. You can set the springs mostly by your thumb. You just press them down and then forward underneath the lip that's molded into the door. If you need to, you can use a little small screwdriver because sometimes they're a little bit tough. I was able to do most of these without a screwdriver. If you need to use a screwdriver, just use a small screwdriver and press down and then forward to seat the spring. There are a total of 3 springs on the ring clip there, and once they're all seated, then your blackout light lamp will be secured and fastened to the door. We can now install the door into the housing. Let's take a look here at the housing assembly. I stripped this down to bare metal and I primed it and painted it using the Ron Fitzpatrick G-Parts Paints products. You've got this screw area slot that's down here, and I'm going to have to scrape off that paint because that's where the opposite end of the ground wire is going to connect. So I'll just go ahead and carefully take a razor blade and I'll scrape the paint off down to the bare metal on the inside of the housing. I've got the paint all removed here around the screw hole, and then I'm going to take the ground wire. I'm going to use the round or the ring side end, and I'm going to attach it to there. This is an original screw that I cleaned up on a wire wheel, and I am going to use a new star washer in this location as well. Install the star washer onto the screw, and then this time, instead of threading it into the opening or the screw hole in the housing, we're going to install it through the ring side connector on the ground wire. I'll grab my assembly here that we put together earlier in the video, and here I'll show you this ring side. Notice how there's a side that I'll call the flat side or face side of the connector. That's what's going to go onto the housing. So we'll install our screw and our star washer inside there, inside the ring, and then we're going to go ahead and screw it into the screw location on the inside of the housing. It's a little difficult to get the screw started, but once you get it started with a couple of threads with your hand, then you can hold the wire down with one of your fingers, and then you can tighten it with a flathead screwdriver. Once again, make sure that that is a tight connection and that the star washer has a good bite into the wire. Notice also the orientation that I have the O-ring connector there. It's to my right, or the tail of it goes to my right, as you can see here where my finger's holding it down. Make sure the connection is nice and tight and the star washer has bit into the fastener. Next, let's take a look at the power line. You see one end here has a bullet style connection on it, and we'll take a look also here. It's got some cloth loom, asphalt loom on it. But the really important part here is not the loom necessarily, because that can also be shielded, but this clip right here. This clip is going to act as a stop in the backside of the housing, and again we've got the fork style connector. The fork style connector is going to be attached to the back side of the lamp assembly in the bulb. Before we do that, let's take another look here at the housing. We've got a hole here in the back of the housing. As you see, there's right there in the center, kind of lower next to the ground wire we put on there. So we're going to feed the bullet end connector and the part that does not have the loom first through the back side of the housing like this. And then when you get that up into there where the loom is, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to get the loom through than it was the actual wire. So kind of work it back and forth with your fingers and it will push through. That loom is going to cover the exposed area that comes up from the fender when we actually install the unit. We'll pull this tight here, and you see that clip stops against the back side of the housing, and that keeps it so the wire can't be pulled out from the outside after this is installed on the bulb. Let's go now back to our lamp assembly, and there's the screw and the washer that's on the back side of the lamp assembly that we'll be attaching it to. If you saw the video previously to this one where I actually disassembled this before I cleaned it up and painted it and reassembled it, I mentioned many times in that video about not removing this screw that goes to the bulb on the back side of this assembly because it can burst or break the bulb. Now how that actually happens I don't know, but it indeed is, I guess, is a reality in the Jeep rebuilding world. So now we've loosened that screw up. We're going to take our fork connector and we're going to slide it underneath the screw, and then we'll tighten this down just like we've done on the other screw till it's nice and snug and tight. Another thing to be noted, if you watched the previous video also, I mentioned in there that if you remove this screw from the actual backside of this housing, it's also difficult to feed back in, and that phenomenon seems to be true too. Okay, so we've got this all nice and tight. Our last step is going to be to attach the door to the housing, and you see that I've got the one wire off to the side, so it's going to be easy for me to do this. There's a little tab on the outside of the door that slides into the opening on the housing. You simply connect those two, and then push the door shut close tight on the housing, and then we've got these two little ears that stick off here. The bottom one is threaded, and we'll reinsert the screw and the lock washer and then tighten that down. I'm using the original screw and lock washer that I just simply cleaned up on the wire wheel. If you also, I have to mention, if you saw the previous video, there's a piece of rubber that was stuck between those two when I first disassembled this. I did run a tap down through the threaded side of this. I don't believe it was stripped, and I still can't figure out why they put that piece of rubber in there, because this unit goes together very nicely and very tightly. Most of the replacement parts you've seen me use in this video are available at Ron Fitzpatrick G-Parts at www.rfjp.com. And so we're all assembled up here, and that's what it looks like. And there's your loom, and there's your wire. One last thing I want to show you before the video is over. There's underneath here on the other side, I did tape that off and did not paint that. And I'm going to go ahead right now as a last move here and take and scrape the little bit of corrosion and rust that's in there that I couldn't get to with a piece of sandpaper and a wire wheel off. So I've got a good place for a ground when I install it. As I wind up here, I'll show you a little clip from when I disassembled the unit. There is a video out there, disassembly. It should be just before this one if you're interested in seeing how to take this apart. But I just want to give you a good look at what this looked like before I took it apart, cleaned it all up, and spray painted it and put it back together. So it's restored now and ready to be installed on the Jeep. Stay tuned for a video in the near coming future. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to subscribe to our channel, Team G503, you can do that by clicking that subscribe button, and also click the bell button icon that you see there at the bottom of the screen for notifications when we release new videos. Until next time, my friends, keep it safe and happy Jeeping.